Hey, what's up everyone? This is Anthony from Anthony's Customs, and for this review we are looking at the Figma Guts. This is the Band of the Hawk version from the anime Berserk. I would suggest you watch this if you are not a young person, because it is definitely not made for kids, but it's a really good show, so I would check it out if you are of the appropriate age. Okay, let's get into the figure because you're not here to talk about anime. Though I would like to do that. 6.5 inches tall, so definitely has some size to him. Very large size figure for Figma, which is a good thing. The bigger the better, as I always say. Well, I said it once. But he's got some good stuff to him. It's a really solid figure. I actually prefer this version over the Black Swordsman version, so that's something I didn't really expect. Before we get into the actual figure, let's look at the accessories. He does, of course, come with the Figma stand and little baggie to hold his parts. He comes with a cape, a nicely sculpted cape, and it has some paint detail on there to make it look kind of textured and worn and shaded, so that's cool. And that just pegs into his back, and then this piece just sits over his shoulders. You can see the little crest on there. Nicely sculpted. So how this works is, it's not the best design, but it works for the figure aside from being too heavy. So you're just going to peg that in back there. You can peg it in all the way if you want to. I'm not going to, just for the sake of time. And then that sits over his shoulders. And it looks a little awkward right now, but that's only because it's made to fit his gigantic sword underneath it. So it's really not bad. It looks fine. It's just that it's really, really heavy. And since it sticks off pretty far on his back, you're going to want to use the display stage to hold him up, which is fine since he does come with one, so I can't really complain too much. I do prefer when figures don't need one, but the look of the cape makes up for the fact that it's too heavy. And he comes with a display stage, so that's okay with me. So let's look at the sword, since we just mentioned that. Without having the sword in, his sheath, holster thingy, does look a little bit awkward. It's just kind of a giant piece of leather hanging there. But with the sword in it, it looks just fine. And he does have one gigantic sword. That's kind of his trademark thing. So that looks really cool when he's got his big sword back there. Very reminiscent of Ike if you're a Smash Brothers fan, or Siegfried if you are a Soul Calibur fan. I am a fan of both of those. And I like this type of character, and I like this one. And the sword is awesome. So let's look at the sword. It is taller than he is, so it's about 6 3/4 inches long. Nicely painted. It's got kind of a titanium looking finish to it with the gunmetal in the middle. Nicely sculpted there, all the way down. And then this part comes off so you can get it in his hand, so that's always a good touch. So very nice sword accessory. He has an alternate face. So he's got the yelling face and he's got the non-yelling face. Very nicely sculpted, nicely detailed, nicely painted. I love the way they put all this extra shading into these figures. Very nicely done. And you just pop it off. This part of the hair looks like it comes off, but it doesn't. It stays on. You just pop the face off and you can swap the other one on. But you have to actually unpeg it. So it doesn't really matter. It's just so that you're aware of that. And then another accessory for his head is his helmet, which is a little bit tricky to remove from the face once you put it on, but it looks really cool, so we're going to do it anyway. You kind of have to, it's actually a little bit tricky to get on because it's a really snug fit. Yeah, but once you get it in there, it looks like it's all one nicely put together sculpt, so that's good. And then we can put the front piece on. And that's his standard helmet, and it looks awesome. I love the way they included this. Very well done. All the little rivets and everything, and you can see his face through there. Looks just like it did in the show. Very cool. And then of course we have a tree of hands. We have 2 open palm hands, 2 gripping hands, and 2 angled gripping hands to go with his 2 clenched fist hands. The detail on these is also nicely done. He's got the wraps, and they even made them look like they're going in between his fingers. We don't often see that. Then the armored hand is also really well done. The only gripe I have about these is because his sword is so large, it's a little bit heavy. The hands are sometimes a little bit too loose in the joint region. They don't swivel too loose because they peg in and swivel, obviously, but this hinge is sometimes too loose. Not a huge deal, but something to note. Alright, let's look at the actual figure. The head articulation, as you kind of already have seen, is just that standard Figma hinge. So it pegs in up top, pegs in at the bottom, so it'll swivel on either of those, and of course it's hinged. The neck itself Same kind of hinge, slightly more spherical, and then we have a peg, a ball peg going in up here to allow for a greater range of motion than just a standard peg. But we have that, so the neck is fully articulated as well. Most Figmas have some kind of similar setup to this. Most of them can come apart very simply, as I just showed you. It's not always the case, so be careful. I am a trained professional. I don't recommend you start trying to take your figures apart. This shoulder armor is somewhat soft. Around the edges it's soft. At the top it's a little thicker, so it's not quite so much, but it does provide for okay range of motion. And then the shoulder is just a ball hinge with a ball peg and then a standard peg, so it moves around on the ball peg, ball hinge, standard peg for a bicep swivel. We have another standard Figma hinge right here, so it'll swivel at the top too, so that gives you a little extra bicep swivel. Standard hinge, and it of course will swivel technically here, but due to the sculpt it will not. Nicely sculpted armor too, nicely sculpted muscles. I think Figma really did a good job on these figures. I like the way the armor and everything just comes together so seamlessly. And then we've already talked about the hands. The torso articulation for this guy is that. Come on, camera. So it's basically the same thing as the lower neck joint. So it's a ball peg at the bottom, a peg at the top, and a hinge right here. Put that back together. This is all soft, by the way, so that's not going to get in the way. And of course, if you move it around like that, it won't look good, but if you leave it in place, I didn't even realize it was a separate piece from this one, so that's perfectly fine. It's not going to get in the way of posing or anything. This knife is a stiff plastic, and it doesn't come out, but it is not really going to get in the way too much. I think you'll be okay. We have the standard 3-way ball peg for the crotch area, ball peg going into the lower torso, and then a ball peg for each hip, and then you can kind of see in there how the ball peg goes into its own socket, and then the thigh can swivel around that. I might be able to pop it off and show you. Yes. So that's how the Figmas are generally made. A 3-way ball peg. Hopefully you can see in there a little bit. And then the floating crotch piece with the armor separate so it doesn't get in the way of anything. Definitely fine for posability. The ball pegs do tend to be a little restrictive, but this guy's not so bad, especially with the loose armor around here, so you shouldn't have too much trouble posing him. It wasn't so bad for me when I was taking the photos for the end of the video. I don't think that leg's on, but I'll get it later. And then for the knees, another standard joint. The one thing about Figmas that I wish we could get a little bit improvement on is really just the joints for the elbows and knees. They often stand out a whole lot. And it's not bad, because once you get them posed, it kind of just disappears and blends in. But I think they could probably do a little bit better for the elbows and knees. But they do work fine, so it's not horrible. And then the ankles on this guy, another standard Figma hinge. But the way it's sculpted, it doesn't give you the greatest range of motion. You can't really bring it any more forward than that unless you loosen the joint, and even then it's just a little bit. But the feet are sculpted really well. Even the spurs and the straps and everything looks really good. And you can rotate the foot around a little bit to give yourself an ankle rocker. So it's not like it's horrible articulation or anything. It's just a little bit limited by sculpt. So that's the standard version of Guts. If they ever reissue this guy, I'm definitely going to buy it. This was lent to me for the review, so thanks to Drunk Panda Inc. for that. But definitely recommend this guy. I prefer this one over the Black Swordsman, like I said. So it's a really solid figure. Stick around for the photos at the end, guys. And thanks for watching. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can see my upcoming figure reviews, custom figures, and other good stuff. And in the meantime, keep collecting.